So for the past many months, you've heard of ChatGPT, you've heard of large language models, and you've probably also heard of prompt engineering. So the idea is, in order for you to be able to communicate with ChatGPT, which actually you're communicating with a large language model, you need to understand how to prompt, how to craft the best prompt so you can get the best results out of these large language models. And so that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this mini course that I put together for you, where we're going to be talking about exactly what is prompt engineering and how do you become a prompt engineer. I'm going to be taking you through the whole process of understanding how to craft the best prompt possible, so that way you're able to interact and chat with these large language models, in this case, ChatGPT. All right, let's go ahead and start learning about prompt engineering. So the basics of everything when it comes to ChatGPT is to understand how to write the best prompts. And so that's the reason why we need to talk about prompting. So what is a prompt? So a prompt is indeed a set of instructions that you pass to ChatGPT. So essentially, think of it as something that you feed to ChatGPT so that you can get results that you want. Now, it is very important, again, to understand how prompting works, the engineering of prompting. That way, you get the results that are useful to you, the results that will help you do what you want to do. That is the most basic building block when it comes to AI, specifically speaking, when it comes to ChatGPT. So really understanding how to construct and how to think about constructing or crafting these prompts is going to be the difference between you getting the best out of ChatGPT versus you getting the worst out of ChatGPT. Okay, so that is the idea of this whole course. Optimal way to ask good questions to ChatGPT. That is what prompting in this case really is. So we understand what a prompt is, but now it's time for us to understand what does a prompt actually contain. Well, a prompt should contain a few things. The first thing that should contain is an instruction. That way you are telling ChatGPT what needs to be done, what task you want it to do. And also, a prompt may contain, in this case, a question. You can say, what is the time in Singapore? Okay, it also can contain context. Now, context is very important because context is the more information that you give to it, the better results you get. So ChatGPT has to understand which context are you giving it so that it gives you the result that you want. We'll talk about that. And also, they may contain inputs as well as examples. Okay, so we understand what a prompt is. Now understand what, in this case, what a prompt may contain. Now this is very important because they say here, instruction is a given, and then we have a question. There could be a question that we are prompting. Context is very important, as we will see, and inputs, examples, and so many things. So a prompt may contain these items or these components as well as many others, but these are the most, I would say, the most basic, most important ones. Now let's talk about prompt engineering. Prompt engineering, what is it? What does that all mean? Well, when we talk about prompt engineering, we're talking about a way in which we can extract, or we can have ChatGPT to give us the most optimal result as possible. So essentially is the science per se of learning how to craft the best optimal prompts to instruct the model, in this case ChatGPT, to perform a certain task. Now, this is very important. I want you to understand the correlation here. We're talking about prompt. Prompt is just a question, an instruction that we give to ChatGPT. Okay. Now, the study of, in this case, the breaking down of the how can we craft the best questions, the best prompt, so that ChatGPT can actually give the results that we want, is what we call prompt engineering. Because we are engineering, we are looking really deep how the mechanism works. And that is exactly what I'm going to be doing in this class, which is I will show you exactly how can we prompt engineer our prompts. That way we get the optimal results or the optimal instructions that we can give to ChatGPT, the model. Therefore, we can get the best results possible. Okay, so now let's talk about prompt breakdown. So we're going to look at the elements in this case so we can construct an optimal prompt, because we're talking about prompt engineering. Now, we have to think in terms of, because we talk about engineering, really, we have to break things down so we really understand. Because remember, if we don't understand how prompts work, how to construct an optimal prompt, then we will just run into a lot of issues. It's going to be very hard for us to get the optimal results, the optimal responses from ChatGPT. So let's look at this. An optimal prompt will include a few things. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the frameworks that come with a really good prompt. The first one is instruction. We're talking about it. So instruction, in this case, we are making it sure that ChatGPT understands, or we're giving ChatGPT a specific task, in this case, an instruction to do something. That is very, very important. Very specific, direct task, right? Could be list X, or tell me how to do Y, or compile a list of X, right? So very direct instruction to do something. We talk about context. To create an optimal prompt, we have to have a context. So what is a context? Well, context is when we give ChatGPT more information about whatever it is that we're trying to ask ChatGPT about. In this case here, this will help give the model more to work with. For instance, instead of saying, what are the best dogs in America, right? That is very general. You could give it a little more context, say, what are the best golden retriever dogs in the state of Maine or in the state of Washington, all right? So we gave it a little bit more context, and you can go overboard by giving more context, more information, so that ChatGPT, the model, is able to infer more about what you want to get back. And also, an optimal prompt includes what we call input data. So what this is, for instance, an input could be an input of any sort, or in this case, could also be a question we want a response for. Output indicator. So output indicator is the format of the output. We can say, for instance, list 10 best cities to live in the United States. And you can see when I say list, that is part of indicating how the output needs to be. I want it in the form of a list, or I could say create a chart, right? Format this list into a chart or something like this. So that is the output indicator we're talking about. Okay, we're going to see examples of this. One thing to keep in mind is that even though I've shown you an optimal prompt would include these components here, that doesn't mean that all the prompts you will ever write must have all of this. Some of the prompts that you may write may just be instruction and add context, and they don't have an output indicator, or they may not have input data, or vice versa. Don't get hung up on, okay, every prompt that I've ever write will have these 3 or 4, in this case, elements. So what we'll do next is I'm going to give you an example, right? And then we're going to break down so you can see the elements of a prompt. Okay, I'll see you next. So earlier what we did is we broke down what a prompt would include, okay? And now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the elements of a prompt, a well-structured prompt. So this is the prompt that we have. Tell me what sentiment the text evokes, neutral, negative, or positive. The text in this case will be, I think it's going to rain today. Let's break it down. So you can see there, the first thing we have is tell me what sentiment the text evokes, neutral, negative, or positive. This is what we call the instruction, because we're telling ChatGPT, hey, in general, do this task for me. And then we have at the bottom here the text which says, I think it's going to rain. What this is what we call, in this case, an input data. So we are actually adding some data to our input. We're saying, I think it's going to rain. That is what needs to be evaluated. And the next thing what we have here is sentiment. The sentiment, it's the output indicator. So we're saying in this case, well, what we want to happen, we want you, ChatGPT, to tell me what is the sentiment. So evaluate this instruction with this input data, the sentiment, which is going to be the output indicator. What output we want? Well, we want the output of a sentiment. Does that make sense? So if you look at this, something is missing. We don't have context from what we saw earlier as one of the elements that may be included in a good prompt. So this validates again what I said earlier, that all of those elements that I said, they may be included. Sometimes they will not be included, and that is totally fine, as you see here. So this is a very good, valid prompt that ChatGPT will actually be happy and give you a good result. Okay, so just to give you an idea, this would give you actually a neutral sentiment, because nor is it negative or positive. Looking at this, it's very simple, but that's the idea. I wanted to break it down so that you really understand the mechanics, because now we're talking about the engineering. We're not just talking about write this, do this. No, this is the engineering, the framework I'm going to give you. That way, in any circumstances, that doesn't matter if you want to ask ChatGPT about very simple things, or if you want to ask it very complex things, like such as creating a big resume or writing a massive book. It doesn't matter. These are the basic concept, the building block concepts that you need to understand when it comes to really go in and look at the engineering of a good prompt. So that is my goal, is that you will understand what's happening when you see a prompt, so you understand the pieces that need to go together. That way you're able to create awesome, optimal prompts. All right, so now that we have a really good grasp on what, in this case, what a good prompt is, and understand what prompt engineering is and elements of a prompt, it is time for us to look at frameworks for prompt engineering. So I'm going to go through a few frameworks with examples. Don't worry, we're going to go to ChatGPT. I'm going to write those so you can actually see the differences. So we go from there. But this is the base that I want you, if you need to, rewatch these previous videos, right? So you really understand, because I think that is what's going to take you from here to here when it comes to your ChatGPT and your prompting capabilities. Okay, I'll see you next. All right, so we're moving forward, and now we're going to talk about frameworks for prompt engineering. So we're going to divide this course now. We're going to go deep down and understand these frameworks that will really get you understanding about prompt engineering at a deeper level, so you can use the knowledge to really supercharge your abilities to talk or to prompt ChatGPT and get the best optimal results. So what is that we're going to be looking at? What frameworks we're going to be looking at? Now, disclaimer here, there are a lot of different frameworks. So obviously I'm not going to go over all of them, but I picked a few that I think will be helpful in your journey of understanding how to prompt the best, in this case, the best prompt for ChatGPT. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is clarifying objectives. We're going to look at the iterative refinement. We're going to look at reverse engineering, question and answer prompt technique, in this case frameworks. We're going to look at instruction-based framework, conversational context, narrowing down, role play, feedback loop, emotion driven. All right, that's a very interesting one. We're going to look at hypothesis testing, comparative, assumptive, and perspective switching. Okay, these are the ones we're going to look at. And if I add one or two, that could happen as well. But these are the main ones that we're going to go over, so you really have the grasp. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The first framework we're going to look at is the clarifying objective. So the idea of clarifying objectives is exactly as it sounds. We want to make sure that our prompt is clear and has very direct objectives of what is it we want to ask. A good example would be something like this. If I paste this, we're compiling a comprehensive yet easy to understand guide about World War II for high school students. This is very direct. It has an objective, so we tell the instructions right away. We are compiling a comprehensive. We're telling this is the objective, which we're clearly defining. We are compiling a comprehensive yet easy to understand guide about World War II for high school students. We'll go ahead and say enter like such. You can see that because we gave ChatGPT very narrow objective, which is in this case to give us a guide, right, about World War II for high school students. As you can see, we have everything that we want. We have introduction, welcome to our comprehensive guide, and the table of contents, and talks about the background, Treaty of Versailles, the rise of fascism, German, Japanese imperialism, and the road to war in Asia. Outbreak of war, 3 major events and battles. This is a very good example of using, in this case, as you see here, a clarifying objective framework. So again, you go back, you can see what is the objective. Well, the objective here is to provide a very detailed, yet understandable guide of World War II for high school students. It's important to really, as an exercise, to start looking at all those elements that we talked about. So there is instruction here. The instruction is to give us a very easy to understand guide about what? About World War II for high school students. Very specific. But again, the main part of the prompt here, we are compiling a comprehensive, so we are adding more objectivity for this prompt. So what I want you to do before you go to the next lesson is to find ways where you can use this framework, which is the clarifying objective framework. The idea is that you have a very defined objective, which is in this case to create or to give us a comprehensive, easy to understand guide about World War II for high school students. Okay, so go ahead and give it a try. Think of something you can do, something you can prompt ChatGPT using this framework. The second framework we're going to talk about is what we call the iterative refinement. The iterative refinement framework allows us to kind of go through a conversation with ChatGPT. What I mean by that is that we can refine a prompt until we get the results that we want. It's almost like you're negotiating with it. In fact, negotiation with the AI or the model is one of the framework as well. But I think iterative refinement kind of falls between or within the negotiation framework. So what that means is as follows. Imagine that I can say something like this. Imagine I started by saying, tell me about World War II, like this. Okay. When I hit enter, what's going to happen is ChatGPT, of course, it will attempt to tell me everything that it knows about World War II. Now that makes sense because as you can see here, it gives us a summary of what happened, when that happened, and how long it happened for, and all the things that led to that, the causes that started World War II, as well as major events and battles and everything else. It may not be what we are looking for. This is the chance that we may have because as you can see also, the prompt is very generic. That's why we get a very generic overview of the results that we get from writing or having this prompt. Tell me about World War II. It's very vague. And so the idea now is if you want something more specific, we can ask it through the iterative refinement. So we're iterating through, giving different prompts, trying to refine to get to the prompt that we actually want, which will get us what we want to see, essentially. So another way to make this even better, I could say something like this. In a detailed manner and structure, please summarize all you know about World War II, like this. Okay. And there we go. So now you can see we have even bullet points because ChatGPT was able to refine a little bit or rather we were able to refine our prompt and ChatGPT was able to give us a little bit more succinct to the point results, which is exactly what you want. And if you look at here, it says World War II was a global conflict, right? And starts putting together the causes in a bullet point format. And also you see the outbreak of the war and major events and battles, as well as Holocaust, Nazi atrocities, and all of what happened in the World War II. All right? And we can keep moving in our refinement. We could probably say something like this. Say, please make sure that all the details are summarized further as if I were to be preparing to give an elevator pitch about World War II, something like this. Okay, maybe not the best way of putting, but you can see we can continue refining everything. And look at this. Right then, it went ahead and summarized everything, condensed everything into this. World War II, the dates, tells us it was a global conflict with significant consequences, and even talks about the Treaty of Versailles, rise of fascism, Germany, Japanese expansion, and all of that. And even touches on the Pearl Harbor and major battles like Stalingrad and Midway. And all of this information touches on decolonization as well, and so forth. All right. So you can see we went from a very vague prompt, which gave us a very vague general response, and we came down to something that is a little bit simpler. We keep iterating through, going through different ways to ask the same thing, to refine, so we can get to the point where the iterative refinement framework actually works to where we get exactly what we want. So it's all about refining, going through this process until you find the correct or the right prompt that will give you what you want. Go ahead and practice this, right? Find any concept that you want to learn about and go vague first, and then start refining until you get to the meat, until you're able to craft, engineer a very succinct, a very refined prompt that gives you the right responses out of ChatGPT. Okay, I'll see you next. Okay, so next we're going to talk about one of my favorite, which is the reverse engineering framework. So the idea of reverse engineering is to do backward. So essentially is looking at a prompt and start thinking backward to get to the result that we want. So a good example would be if I were to say, okay, something like this: please summarize the main causes of World War II, the key events during the war, and its global aftermath. Now you can see that when we look at this prompt, is that the prompt has been constructed to guide ChatGPT in this case towards a desired result, which is in this case the key events during the war and its global aftermath. Okay, so these are the things that we need to cover. We're asking ChatGPT to cover when giving back the results. So that's the beauty of reverse engineering, because as you can see here, we're thinking backwards from the desired response. Okay, let's see what this is going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click. So now you can see ChatGPT went ahead and put together the causes, because that's one of the keys that we asked to consider, right? The key events, the main causes first, and then the key events during the war, and then its global aftermath. And you see here we have the causes: harsh Treaty of Versailles, rise of fascism, Japanese expansion policies. And then we have the key events during the war, German invasion, all of that, and then the global aftermath, okay? Holocaust and total mobilization of the home front, Allied victories, and all of that. And at the end, of course, we have this very more succinct summary of everything. World War II had a lasting impact on the world, shaping political, social, and economic structures. Its consequences serve as a reminder of the importance of peace, understanding, and the pursuit of a better future. And there you go. So you have the reverse engineering framework. That's very powerful. You can see that the prompt is being constructed, or was constructed, to guide ChatGPT towards a desired response. So we took ChatGPT, we kind of handheld it to give us exactly what we want. In this case, reverse engineering everything. Again, go ahead and think of a situation, or think of a prompt that you can ask ChatGPT, where you can use this framework, and you will see the power and nuances of this awesome framework. And I hope this is going to be helpful. Okay, keep practicing. That's the most important thing. All right, I'll see you next. So next we're going to look at another framework called question answer, which is essentially, as the name implies, you just go direct and ask a question to ChatGPT. For instance, you could say something like this: what countries initiated World War II? Put exclamation mark and say enter, and see what ChatGPT is going to say, because we're prompting directly with a question, and hopefully we get a response. And from there, we can reverse engineer it. We can go back and make it more objective. We can do all sorts of things, but that is the idea. Okay, let's see. And sometimes ChatGPT just won't go. So let's see what's going to happen here. Okay, let's give it another try just to make sure. Okay, there we go. So because we give it a very straight question, so we are using this case question answer framework. So what countries initiated World War II? All right, so the countries initiated World War II were primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. Okay, it gives us an overview of each country's involvement in initiating this war. There you go. So this is very simple. Just go ahead and ask a question and you get an answer. You can ask another question. And here we can continue using this question answer framework. We can say, which of these countries were the most vocal about World War II? Just to see. Okay, so goes ahead and talks about exactly answering the question that we've asked, and it tells us exactly the countries, but as well as the leaders who were very vocal about it. All right, so there we go. Very, very simple example. Just think of question, answer. So you ask it directly, and then you get an answer. Remember the idea here, we are learning how to craft, how to engineer the best optimal prompt. So I'm showing you these frameworks. That means you can use them as you go through, as you think about what you want to ask ChatGPT. That is the idea. So in this case here, we're using question, answer. You can also use the iterative refinement that we saw earlier as much as you want to get different answers, different results. So that is the idea. Go ahead and test this out, and I'll see you next. Next, we're going to talk about instruction-based framework. Now, as the name implies, this means what we need to do with the instruction-based framework is we give ChatGPT explicit instructions about what we want the outcome to be. So a good example would be, as you see here, I'm saying in detailed and structured manner, please summarize how World War II changed the way we live today. And you can see here, we are telling ChatGPT, no pun intended, I'm using the same word detail, but it works, right? In detail and structured manner, I want you to summarize how World War II changed the way we live today. And if I hit enter, let's see what the results will be. And there you have it. You can see ChatGPT is spitting out in detail what we ask it to do. Let's take a look. Okay, so World War II brought about significant changes that continues to shape the way we live today. And here's a detailed summary of transformative effects of World War II. Global power shift. Number one, technological advances and scientific progress. Human rights and international law. Economic and social transformation, technology-driven, and so forth. This is a very detailed approach, right? Instruction-based, because we instructed it directly in what we want to do. Now, some of these frameworks do overlap with each other, but I just want to show you the whole picture so you understand what's happening as you construct prompts. So as an exercise, I would like you to use the same approach, this instruction-based framework, and see if you can come up with even more detailed instructions. This is a very simple example, right? I'm going to say in detail in instructional manner, please summarize. Try and figure out other ways you can give more details to your prompt. And once you do that, I would like you to share that prompt, those prompts with us in the comments. All right, very good. So I'll see you next. All right, so now because the way ChatGPT actually works in general, this next framework is almost like a no-brainer. It's almost like it's already built in. The next framework we're going to talk about is the conversational context. Now, what this is it allows us to continue almost like a thread, a chat thread, contextually continuing to talk about the same thing and asking about the same subject. So essentially, it's a conversation that you can have. You can say, okay, you told me this is a good response, but now how about this about the same context that we're talking about? In this case, we're talking about World War II. We can do something like this, right? Because earlier we asked it in detailed structured manner, please summarize how World War II changed the way we live today. And now it's a more of a follow-up question. And I say, and how did it impact the African continent? Include the most relevant events triggered by World War II in the African continent. All right. So let's go ahead and see what will happen. Okay, see now I have the next leg or the next step that I've prompted because I want to continue this conversational context. It says here World War II had significant impacts on the African continent, shaping its political, social, economic landscape. And here are some of the relevant events triggered by war in Africa. North Africa, so it divides it in all directions. So got North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, liberation movements, and post-war politics, political changes. All right, and there you go. So this is conversational, which means you can continue asking more questions, but remember that you keep the same context. Now, when we talk about context, we're talking about what ChatGPT knows about what you're talking about. So you notice here, I said, how did it? I didn't say directly World War II. So it knew exactly, inferred by the it, right? Inferred that we were talking about World War II. So the context is still there because that's what we've been talking about on this chat. All right, so there you go. Try to figure out ways in which you can continue this same conversation or whatever conversation you're starting on ChatGPT and practice. Don't forget to share with me in the comments the results and, of course, the prompts that you're crafting because that's very exciting. All right, that's it for now, and I'll see you next. So narrowing down is the next framework we will talk about. As the name implies, narrowing down, what it means is that we want to start broad with a broad concept that we want to ask, and then we narrow down, again, back to sort of a conversational context to exactly what are the main points that we want, the detailed. So a good example would be, let's say if I ask ChatGPT something like this, tell me about climate change. As we've seen before, this is the best example, one of the examples of a broad prompt. So let's see what's going to happen if I just go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so now ChatGPT, climate change refers to long-term shifts and alterations in global or regional weather patterns. It goes through all of the technical jargons and everything, the causes of climate change, and also talks about impacts of climate change, the rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, ecosystem disruption, and all of that. There's also mitigation and adaptation. All right, so it's pretty good. Talks about international cooperation, understanding climate change, and taking collective action. All right, so narrowing down, because we went very broad, and it gave us a very broad definition, a very broad explanation of what climate change is. Now we can write something like this as a prompt, okay? Because now we want to narrow it down. What are some major causes of climate change, right? From that broad definition, tell us what is this. Now we're saying, okay, good, that's great. But what are now some major causes of X, in this case of climate change? Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so it says here, climate change is primarily caused by human activities that release greenhouse gases, right, GHGs, into atmosphere. Here are some major causes. So it lists all of the major causes, as you see. Very cool. So that's the idea. We can even continue narrowing down. Remember, this is part of conversation as well. Always think in terms of you are conversing with ChatGPT to get the results that you're looking for, right? So the refinement, again, same thing really, the refinement of these prompts as we engineer them, these prompts, you have to also understand that you tweak things along until you find or you get exactly what you're looking for. So that is the engineering part of it, right? There's no one formula that fits all. It's just trying to figure out, trying to find, trying to refine our prompts, engineering our prompt, crafting our prompts to where we get to the meat of the issue or of whatever it is that we're looking to get out of ChatGPT. Okay? All right. I'll see you next. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite frameworks, which is Roleplay framework. Now, the Roleplay framework, you can use it to really get to the meat of whatever it is that you're trying to learn or get out of ChatGPT. The idea is very simple, is that you use a role to explain or do something. Explain X concept as if I were 2 years old or 3 or 5, right? Depends. So the example is very simple. I'm gonna show you an example. So here is a role play example. So it says here, imagine I am a 5th grade student. Can you explain to me what photosynthesis is? Right, let's see what happens. So the idea, as you see here, is that I'm using a role play. Say, hey, imagine that I'm a student who is a 5th grader student, right? That's very important. So that is the role I want ChatGPT to play. And then once you understand that, ChatGPT got that part, can you explain to me as a 5th grade student how photosynthesis works? This is very powerful because it shows you the power of ChatGPT and how it really understands our commands, our prompts to get exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and see. Okay, there we go. So now it spits out everything that it knows about in this case, photosynthesis to a 5th grader. And says, of course, I'll be happy to explain photosynthesis to you as a 5th grade student. Photosynthesis is a process that plants use to make their own food. Very, very simple. You understand? Oh, okay, that makes sense. Just like we humans need to eat food to get energy, plants also need energy to grow and survive. But unlike us, plants can't go to grocery store to buy their food. Instead, they make their own food using a special process called photosynthesis. That's very cool. That's really, really great. I like this analogy. And it's great because it's for a 5th grader. Now we can do the same thing. I can say, imagine I am, in this case, grad student. Let's see what's going to happen now. Because now instead of 5th grader, now I'm a graduate student. Let's see how it will explain. Okay, there we go. So you will expect that the explanation is going to be a little bit more complex because we are a grad student, or we ask ChatGPT to act, or in this case, to imagine that we are a grad student. Certainly, as a graduate student, let's dive into a more detailed explanation of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a vital process that occurs in plants, algae, and some bacteria. It is the primary way in which these organisms convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of organic molecules. You see, in the previous prompt, we did not even talk about organic molecules, because molecules, it's an advanced topic. A kid, a 5th grader, wouldn't probably know what a molecule is. So now we're going to deep down to specific because we ask it to play a different role. So there we go. Now I can even go further. This is just fun, right? We're just playing here. Instead of I'm going to say, imagine I am a genius. Imagine I am Einstein. Okay, imagine I am Einstein. Can you explain to me what photosynthesis is? Let's see what's going to happen. There we go. So it went to a genius level because Einstein was a genius. Okay, so certainly photosynthesis is a remarkable process, blah, blah, blah. And then photosynthesis takes place in specialized organelles. Organelles. So we're going really deep into the world of botanic. I think it's botany, called chloroplasts. Very, very deep, okay? Primarily found in cells of plants' leaves. Within the chloroplasts, there are pigments such as chlorophyll that absorb light energy from the sun. Okay, so now so now we've changed roles. So say, imagine I am Einstein. So ChatGPT knows who Einstein was. Very smart person. So instead of explaining it as a 5th grader or even as a grad student, it went a step up to explain, because Einstein, as I say, was smart. So it assumed that Einstein had a good grasp, of course, of science. So it went ahead and went a little bit deeper into explaining what photosynthesis is. Pretty cool, actually. I'm learning really good stuff. I remember learning this stuff when I was going to school. All right, very good. And there you have it. Understanding role play, it's vital to prompting or to creating, or in this case, to prompt engineering, because it allows you to tap into the very core of how ChatGPT works. Because now you're giving ChatGPT a role to play and see what it comes up with. You can use this in many different cases and you will see the results are incredible. Okay, and again, you can use the previous frameworks to refine, to have the conversational context and so forth. But it is just amazing. It's one of those frameworks that I use all the time. And if you know how to use this, it's very simple. If you can refine, continue refining and finding other angles, you will see that you are unstoppable and you will get really good results with ChatGPT. So this is part of engineering, right? Part of breaking things apart and finding frameworks that we can use to get the results that we want. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Next, we're going to talk about feedback loop framework. So what this means essentially is if we have a prompt, right, and then we type the prompt, hit enter, we're going to have an output from that prompt. So the output of our first prompt is going to be the input for our second prompt, creating this feedback loop. Let me show you real quick. Imagine that we have a question or a prompt like this. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to tell us a story. I should say tell me, but it's okay. ChatGPT is smart enough to know that we made a mistake and it fills in the blanks for us. It's telling me a story because that's exactly what I asked. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled at the edge of a lush forest, there lived a curious girl named Maya. Maya had an insatiable appetite for adventure and a heart full of wonder. So now what we can do is we understand, of course, it's about Maya, and we can ask a question, a follow-up question per se, right? A feedback loop. That way we can have this multi-turn conversation, as they call it. How many sisters had Maya? How many sisters Maya has? Something like this. I'm sorry, but I don't have access to personal information about individuals unless it was been shared. Okay, that's fine. This just tells us ChatGPT doesn't have the context of the information that we asked. We can say, for instance, that means the output of our first prompt was not a correct input for our second prompt, in this case, for our feedback loop. So it's okay. What we can do now, we can say something like this. What kingdom was Maya from? Okay, there we go. And now it's telling us the Maya civilization was not associated with specific kingdom, but rather refers to a Mesoamerican civilization that existed in the region that encompasses present day. Now, the idea here is that what happened is that we still have that problem because ChatGPT is assuming Maya as the Maya civilization and not our Maya here. And also just notice that I made a mistake on my prompt. Let's go back to this prompt here, right? See if we get the same issue. Say how many sisters Maya have? Okay, we still have the same thing here. Now, this is a good thing because it tells us that context is very important, of course, with ChatGPT, and especially when we talk about feedback loop framework. So in this case here, what we can ask, we need only to be able to ask things that are related to this story, right? This tell me a story that we asked earlier, and ChatGPT spit out this very nice story. So again, goes back to understanding that context is everything, because if you ask ChatGPT something, contextually speaking, it will look at what you've typed or the story or whatever it is that was spit out earlier, and will base off of that. So in this case, that's why we're having this problem. That's why ChatGPT is not really getting the context of what we are asking, because in this case, our feedback loop is not going to be complete. It's not going to be able to occur or happen because the context. So let's find something else. Let's go back to our story. Okay, so it talks about the guardian tree. So we can ask something like this. Who was the guardian? Who was the guardian tree, and how old was he or she? All right, let's see. Okay, there we go. Now, in the context of the story I previously shared, the guardian tree is a fictional character that represents a wise ancient being inhabiting the forest. So the guardian tree possesses magical qualities and holds the knowledge of the forest and its creatures. There we go. So we took, of course, ChatGPT went ahead and understood that we're asking that the context in this case has to be the story that it wrote for us because we asked it to. And then we have now able to complete, or rather to have this feedback loop, right? Because we asked about the guardian tree, some deeper information. So we got in this case, the guardian tree is an output from our story, which came from our first prompt, and the guardian tree as the output now is an input on our second prompt here. Does it make sense? So this is what we call feedback loop. So you can do this with anything that you ask ChatGPT. But remember, as you saw here, context is everything. So ChatGPT is real good at finding the context. But if it cannot infer the output, as you saw, from the resource, or in this case, from the response, it will just not know what to say because it doesn't have that information. So feedback loop, think of it as output from A has to be the input for B. Okay, so output from the first response has to be the input for the second question, or in this case, second prompt. All right, great, thank you, and I'll see you next. All right, so we're making really good progress here, and I hope you're enjoying these lessons. And what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about the emotion-driven framework. As the name implies, we are going to pack emotion into a prompt, right? That way we can get a little bit more out of ChatGPT. The idea is that we're going to be crafting prompts, as you will see in a little bit here. We're going to craft prompts that evoke or inquire about specific emotional responses. Here's an example. ChatGPT, can you create a heartwarming story about a dog who helps a young boy regain his self-confidence? Now, look at this. It says heartwarming story, right? It evokes emotions, okay? About a dog who helps young boy regain his self-confidence. And so ChatGPT will have to keep that in mind, if I may say, that this story has to be heartwarming, an emotion of heartwarming, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look. And there we go. Once upon a time, it's writing this story. Okay, so it's finished writing the story, and let's see. Once upon a time, a small town nestled with shimmering lake, there lived a young boy named Max. Max was a kind-hearted child, but he had lost his self-confidence after a difficult experience at school. Feeling alone and discouraged, he spent most of his days secluded in his room. Okay, so of course the story goes on, and as you know, these kind of stories, they have to end with a teaching and the moral of the story per se. Okay, so it's real good. And of course at the end, Max will have confidence. Okay, so there we go. So this story is heartwarming, as you see if you read more, because the idea is that Max was a wonderful kid, but then something happened to Max, made him secluded. Okay, I didn't have to read the whole story to see that that's how it will go, where Max, of course, something's going to happen to him again that will make him feel that he can be confident again. Okay, so that is heartwarming, right? Because if you read the story, it makes you feel, oh, so that's the idea. And it's all about direction again, as we talk about crafting the best prompts possible, engineering the best prompts possible, is that we're crafting something that will always give us what we're looking for. And that is very important because it's all about the language, right? If you ask the right questions, you get the right answers quicker, per se. Now, you use this, you can say heartwarming or sad or lively or whatever adjectives that will evoke a sense of emotion. You can use those when you craft your prompt, and you'll see amazing results. Okay, so what I need you to do now is practice this, as always. That should go without me saying. Go ahead and practice this. And remember, I'm using very trivial, in a way, examples, but this can be used in any situation, right? It doesn't matter if you're writing a story, if you're writing a blog, if you're writing something. You can use all these frameworks together to really craft the best of the best prompts. All right? Go ahead and practice, and I'll see you next. In this lesson, we're going to talk about hypothesis testing framework. Now, this is actually one of my favorites because what it does is we are going to structure our prompt so that we give it an hypothesis, And then we're going to let ChatGPT, because ChatGPT understands more than we can possibly understand, we'll let ChatGPT to explore and to confirm or deny that hypothesis that we gave to it. Here's an example. Given the hypothesis that regular physical exercise improves mental health, can you provide arguments that support or contradict this? Okay, this is real good, because now we're saying, so given the hypothesis, we're pretending that we don't know if this is true or false. So we are giving an hypothesis that exercise improves mental health. We're asking ChatGPT to give us an argument, in this case to support or contradict this hypothesis. Let's go ahead and see. All right, so it's writing now, supporting arguments, release of endorphins, stress reduction, increased brain function, social interaction, and we have contradicting arguments here: individual variations, underlying conditions, motivation and compliance, and other interventions. So there we go. So we've used this hypothesis testing framework, as you see here. Of course, we can use other frameworks we've learned to even dig deeper with this hypothesis testing framework that we just learned now. Okay, so I hope you're seeing the connectivity of all of this engineering that we're doing of crafting the best optimal prompts for ChatGPT. All right, so next we're going to talk about comparative framework. So what we're doing here is we are letting ChatGPT, we're giving it a prompt, something, and we're going to let ChatGPT to use its own power to compare or in contrast also those two things or something. Okay, so here's an example I'm going to show you real quick. So can you compare and contrast classical music and rock music in terms of their history, musical structure, and cultural impact? You can see we are comparing what? Classical music and rock music. Okay, but we corner even further by saying in terms of what? In terms of their history, musical structure, and cultural impact. All right, so let's see what ChatGPT has to say. Okay, there we go. So it went ahead and put together a list, right, for each of the structure that we added. We want to compare those two in terms of history, musical structure, and cultural impact. So it divided everything for history. Classical music is originated in the Western tradition and spans broad period of the medieval era to the present day. It talks about Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and Tchaikovsky. All right, and rock music, and talks about all these artists that started, well, that pretty much brought this to prominence, rock music to prominence in the 60s and 70s. And because we asked ChatGPT to also look in terms of the musical structure, the classical music is characterized by its complex composition and formal structures. Okay, sonatas, symphony, concertos, and fugues or fugues. All right, and rock music and cultural impact and all of that. Okay, and of course at the end we have that beautiful summary that always comes with ChatGPT. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that when you construct your prompts, is that we could have said, can you compare and contrast classical music and rock music? And we could have stopped there. But as you should know by now, that is a little bit more generic. We want to focus, narrow things down so we can get the best out of ChatGPT, right? This is part of constructing and engineering your best prompts. So we said, well, in what terms? In terms of their history, musical structure, and cultural impact. There's an airplane going above my house now. I apologize. All right. So it's important to always think of narrowing down, because it is about narrowing it down where that we can get what we are really seeking, looking for in terms of results from ChatGPT. So always keep that in mind. All right. Great. And I'll see you next. Okay, so we're making real good progress here. I hope you're enjoying these lessons, this course, and if so, please don't forget to leave a review. That will really make me happy. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Assumptive framework. What this means is that we're going to craft a prompt, a ChatGPT prompt with some assumptions. Now, we don't judge those assumptions being truth or false. No, we're just going to give some assumptions. Then we're going to let ChatGPT to use those assumptions and build upon that. Here's an example. Assuming we have established a colony on Mars, oh, that'd be nice. How would daily life on Mars be different from life on Earth? That's a great assumption. So what he's saying here is assuming there's an assumption that we live in a colony on Mars. We've established ourselves on Mars. Please, ChatGPT, how would daily life on Mars be different from life on Earth? Okay, so we gave it an assumption and we ask what we want from ChatGPT. All right, let's see. Okay, there we go. So it's now done and we have something here. So, okay, gravity and physical effects. So it broke down into a list and the bullet points to present all of some of these ways where the life on Earth and on Mars may differ. So first of all, gravity and physical effects. It talks about reduced gravity on Mars, adaptation challenges, atmospheric conditions being different, environmental factors, and so on. As you can see, the Assumptive framework is really easy to use and really gives ChatGPT a bigger playground to play with, right? To really get the information that we're looking for. And of course, you can always go and keep refining. That should be the thing you always think about. You can always refine your prompts until you get to where you want to be. This is the Assumptive framework, and the idea is that you give some assumptions to ChatGPT and you ask a question based on that assumption, and then ChatGPT will build off of that and go from there. Okay, I'll see you next. So we are going to talk about perspective switching framework. Now, this is another one of my favorite, because whenever you have some sort of perspective, some sort of an angle, those are elements for prompting or creating or crafting, in this case, one of the best prompts that you will ever do, right? The engineering of it. So the idea really is very simple, is that we are asking ChatGPT to give us a different perspective, right? Hence the name perspective switching. So we're really asking ChatGPT to give us a different perspective on whatever we're trying to ask. Here's a good example. Explain the concept of blockchain technology as you would to a computer scientist, okay? And then as you would to a 10-year-old. Now you can see when you look at this prompt requests the AI to explain the same concept, which in this case is computer science, or rather a blockchain technology, to two perspectives, right? So the first part of the prompt is asking to explain this concept of blockchain to a computer scientist. And the second part is to explain the same concept to a 10-year-old. Let's go ahead and take a look. We have the explanation to a computer scientist, and of course, it's going to be a little bit technical: decentralization, cryptography, consensus mechanism, immutability, smart contracts, and so forth. And then to a 10-year-old, of course, it goes ahead, uses a lot of more analogies to understand. Honestly speaking, I always like the 10-year-old, right? Because it's a day-to-day language, and it's always nice. Of course, there's place for both, but whenever I want to understand something first, I go for a 10-year-old. All right, and there we have it. So using perspective switching framework, as you see here, it's a very powerful, because now you have this comparison. If you want, for instance, you're teaching a class or you want to explain something to your grandma, you can always use this framework, right? So use perspective of a 10-year-old versus perspective of a 45-year-old, a scientist, a non-scientist, a biologist, a computer scientist, or a physicist, and so forth. Okay, so it's really fun. Actually, you can ask ChatGPT to explain certain diseases as a doctor, in contrast as a biologist, or as a PA, physician assistant, and so many things, right? Go ahead and play around with this concept, and remember to always go back to the previous frameworks I've shown you here, and you can match, right? Get parts of this framework and the other one and put it together. And one thing to keep in mind as well is that you don't have to add all of these different frameworks in one single prompt, right? It's sometimes virtually impossible. The idea is that whenever you want to prompt ChatGPT something, first of all, the first most important thing is to remember that you have to give very clear, specific direction. That is number one. Otherwise, you just get, as you saw, a very generic response. And from there, you start going down the list of the frameworks we've used and many, many other frameworks. But the idea is that you're always refining, you're always constructing, you're always engineering these prompts to the point where you can get the prompt that will get you the results that we want. And always keep that in mind. It's a refinement process. You're constantly refining different contexts, adding different perspectives, switching, or role plays, and whatever it is that you need to get exactly what you want. Okay, so what I want you to do is to create at least 2 prompts. You can choose whichever topic you want to target. And then once you have those 2 prompts, try to use this perspective switching framework and see how that would work. Share that with us in the comments and let me know. Okay, thank you, and I'll see you next time. All right, and that was the end of this course. Thank you so much for your time. If you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe, like, thumbs up, and leave the comment below if you have any questions, because I would love to hear from you. So I hope now you are armed with all the tools you need to craft the best prompts possible, and who knows, maybe become a prompt engineering. As you can see, not only is this a very lucrative role or skill to have, but it's also a skill that's going to be a necessity for years to come, because AI is here to stay, and so we need to find ways to better communicate with it so we can get the results we want. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.